I'd like to first start by thanking Dean Luce and his wonderful team for inviting me here to follow in the footsteps of the Dream Team, and also our great leadership of Lorraine Harricombe, the Dean of our libraries. I wish that Ada and Town could be here. They're part of actually I should tell you that I exchanged emails with Ada a little bit before this talk this morning, and her metaphor for how we got this done was it was something like she conceived of a Viking ship where she's the oarswoman giving the directions, and the rest of us are rowing, but we're all rowing in the same direction. I kind of think of the three of us as a kind of trireme, and I'm thinking now of calling Ada our oarswoman with a capital O-A at the beginning of that word. This is a very exciting time, and I was delighted to see that our colleagues here are so excited about it. There really is a lot to be excited about. You're in for some great times as you develop open access on campus. For me, it's been a great ride. I came in in various pieces. In 2005, I started with a journal, putting it into KU ScholarWorks and making it gradually real-time open access alongside of a print edition. And then I started another journal that started immediately in open access when it was started up. What I'd like to talk to you about today is more the nuts and bolts of how to get faculty to come along. And I think of myself as a kind of interpreter between librarians and faculty, because I am a faculty member. I'm also a linguist and work in a language department where we think about cultural translation. And so I've developed a few skills going between the two cultures. So one of the things I'd like to impart to you as librarians to try to get into the mind or the psyche of faculty members is that as a mentor of mine once told me early in my career, to understand a faculty member, you have to understand that they live in a universe of one. And as you can see, in my universe, 2013 has a leap year in it. I also want to talk about the kind of nuts and bolts of how we did this, and I think I'll probably keep my remarks a little bit shorter, because what I'd really like to know, and this became clearer as we were talking over dinner about the implementation of the open access policy, is that what I thought you might be interested in may be different than what you're really interested in. So I'm kind of looking forward to the question and answer period where we can really get to the nuts and bolts things that you'd like to know. And of course, I'd be delighted to work with anybody who'd like to come up to KU, or I could even come down and have another visit, or Ada in Town, and I can do this, and we can talk through some of the things that we have done. But I'd also like to talk in terms of various roles I've had as a faculty member. So I've also been a very long-time chair of a department. I was chair of the Slavic department for some 12 years. I'm now billed as the chair of the German department, which is just a temporary administrative hat. And I've also been an associate dean. And each one of these roles has helped me think in slightly different ways about how open access can be used as a tool for faculty development. Somebody last night asked me if we had any secret weapons to get open access going, and I was a little bit shocked, but I guess in a pleasant way, to find that you seem to have found one of our secret weapons. In fact, it's Ada's secret weapon. When I was registering as one of the speakers, I was handed a 1 kilo box of locally made chocolates. In fact, chocolate is the secret weapon. How so? Well, Ada would always start every meeting with faculty when she was trying to bring them along with bits of chocolate. She'd bring really high-quality Belgian chocolate, whatever good chocolate she could get her hands on to the meeting. And it always set a really nice tone. It was very friendly, inviting, and not everybody loves chocolate, but enough people do that it actually, I think, softened the tone of the meetings. So as I mentioned, this is a faculty perspective. I think I'm going to touch on some of the themes that others have talked about in their talks yesterday and Lorraine talked about today, but I want to give you a kind of cognitively different perspective. So what concerns faculty? The first thing that we encountered, and this was the pushback in our initial attempts to get the faculty to forge ahead with the open access policies, they're afraid they were going to lose things. And Lorraine alluded to this in speaking about some meetings where we were thrown out of or had rather contentious encounters with our colleagues. That wasn't always the case, and I would say it's even the minority of cases. But there was very definitely a fear factor involved where faculty were afraid that they were going to lose something. Somebody was going to steal their text, somebody was going to ruin their text, they were going to ruin their research by doing this, they weren't going to get tenure. And so one of the things we started working on was trying to demystify the whole process of going in the direction of open access and take away those fears. And I felt very vindicated, too, when I went to a management seminar very recently where it says that of the two approaches that you can take in trying to get people to adopt change, you can either cheerlead or you can remove objections. And there's good data that shows that the more effective of those two approaches is to remove objections. So that seemed like a very good way to start. Have a list of the things that people are concerned about. When we actually spent some time compiling a list of those concerns that would crop up again and again, and we thought through answers to them so that we could very readily disentangle or demystify some of the concerns that people have. Then back to the faculty as center of the universe, of course, they always want to know what can I gain with OA, and of course there's a great deal that one can. There's the idea that if you put it out on the internet in some way, it's going to be plagiarized, stolen, and so we spent a lot of time talking about what copyright is and talking through what it means to retain your rights. I think most faculty think of copyright as one single thing, and it was quite eye-opening to me too when I started working on this, that copyright is a bundle of rights and that it's a matter of breaking them down and understanding what you can keep and what you can afford to give away in order to accomplish the goals you want with your scholarly communication. But I think more central to my interest in working with my faculty was finding a way that open access could make the work more visible. And somebody had tweeted last night that they were interested in humanities perspective. This really becomes a big thing for humanities because in some ways the STEM disciplines are ahead of the curve. They've been doing open access in one form or another for a long time. The numbers of readers are much higher than they are for humanities scholars. In fact, I have to say that when I first started doing my research, I would more or less correspond first in letter form, posted letters, with the 3 to 6 people that were interested in the topics that I would write about, and we would exchange our off-prints, and it seemed like that was about right? There are 6 people interested in my work, and I was about interested in maybe a dozen people that were working on similar topics. To me, that's just fine for a little ecosystem, and it worked well. So open access, as you'll see, really changed the way I've viewed my own research. And I think many humanists find themselves in this position too. They don't really realize how powerful their work can be when it has a global reach using the tool of open access. And then, of course, as many of you have mentioned already, you have article-level data. This is a really a fantastic tool that I think we're just beginning to discover how useful it really is, and I'll have something to say about that towards the end of my talk here. And in some ways, I think also open access gives you a great deal more flexibility in shaping the fields of inquiry. So I've been involved in starting up and editing 2 different new journals that have been very closely bound up with open access. One of them had a really amazing rise, which I'll talk about in a moment, for a very small field, largely because of our open access exposure. Yeah, this is a slide that you've probably seen before. It's getting a little bit dated now. It's some research done in 2009. So the visibility thing is very much connected with the way that researchers are themselves doing their own research. So as you can see, there's a big shift from walking into the library, visiting the stacks when you start your research. There used to be this Z section, I think, where you go in and look at the volumes for your particular field and look at the standard bibliographies, which had something like a 5-year or even more time lag to see what's being written. And now, of course, people Google first, and they use online electronic data resources. In a sense, this is the really big thing about open access is that if your article can be found in 1 or 2 clicks using a Google search on a keyword, that's the path of least resistance for your readers. And so in some ways it seems absurd when you get your mind around this particular aspect of it, why anybody wouldn't want to be in open access, right? You want to be read, that's why you wrote the research in the first place, and anything less than completely open access is inadequate because you're not going to come up at the top of the Google search, or you're going to have too many clicks or too many barriers to get to your research, and you're not going to get cited. And that's what the game seems to be about right now. So this is one of my little prides and joys. This was really eye-opening. This is one of my articles that I wrote in the mid-2000s called Multiple Causation in the Spread and Reversal of Sound Change, Rhoticism in South Slavic. So you know that's a New York Times bestseller when you hear a title like that. This is one of those things that I absolutely did not expect anything more than maybe a dozen readers might be interested in this, because who cares? There are a few Slavists that might be interested in this particular sound change. For reasons that I think I won't go into here, this is actually a really interesting article. It tells you something about the relations between the formation of 2 different groups of people in the Balkans between the Catholic and Byzantine world. So it's not quite as esoteric as it might seem. But as you can see, I had more than 3 readers here. When I took the snapshot of this, I had 637 downloads, which isn't too bad, considering my expectations were for 3 or 4, and considering the esoteric nature of the topic. But what was really interesting was where the downloads are happening. So as you can see, I think you can see that, the top one is the United States, which always seems to be the case. So it's well read where people have the most equipment to read it. But Italy came up second. China comes up third. I'm not quite sure why that's the case. France third, Turkey fourth, Croatia and Germany after that, Slovenia, Yugoslavia, which I think is a proxy for Serbia, and then down the row. The reason I thought this was meaningful was this precise kind of sound change takes place in Romance languages, Italian, French, happens in Turkish and Turkic languages, happens in the South Slavic language of Croatia. There are many Slavists in Germany who work on these kinds of problems. So I could see a very distinct pattern of roughly what groups of people were getting interested in this. And when I think about the journal that it was published in, which is called Slovene Linguistic Studies, which I happen to know is subscribed to by almost exactly 40 libraries throughout the world, mostly in Eastern Europe and about a dozen in the United States. The print version would almost certainly have been consulted by just a handful of people who knew that they were looking for something Slavistic and would go to the shelves, and it would only have been available to those institutions that partnered with the Slovene Academy of Sciences, which was generous enough to donate the print copies of the journal there. So in the print version, it had a very, very small chance of being read. I would never have dreamed this would be of interest outside of Slavic studies, but it clearly is. And I even get feedback from readers and researchers outside of my field all the time now, because I can see that the open access versions of these are connecting with those readers that I never expected to have, and they've created new connections for me that that have expanded my world as a researcher. So I also thought about how these data can be used to help build my faculty's research profile. And one of the things I've concretely done as a chair, it falls to me to prepare tenure and promotion dossiers. And so I've done about 4 or 5 of these now where I've used some OA data from our KU ScholarWorks repository. This is an example from a recent promotion case that I put together, which all of these have been successful, and this one was successful too. But you can see the patterns, even the numbers themselves tell something, particularly in conjunction with other pieces of information. So this is a colleague of mine who works in Russian language, second language acquisition, and he had one article called Making Our Way Towards Teacher Education Programs in the Slavic Languages, which had 113 downloads. And then another article, Implementing Task-Based Teaching from the Ground Up, Considerations for Lesson Planning and Classroom Practice. Well, as it turned out, this one had 751 downloads. As it turned out, the external letters talked about the impact, the qualitative impact of this particular person's research. And 4 of the 6 letters highlighted how groundbreaking the second article was for the broader field of second language pedagogy. So it wasn't limited just to Slavic, which is a subset of the field. And so the combination of the two things, the numbers, the higher numbers for the broader article, plus the highlighting in the separately elicited external review letters, made a very coherent and compelling narrative that I think helped make this an open and shut case for this faculty member's research. So not only, I think the lesson from this is not only does open access not hurt your tenure and promotion chances, which is one of the big worries that particularly junior faculty have, but in fact it greatly enhances them. And I've seen now many cases in my own area where this has been the case. And I know anecdotally too from other fields too, talked with somebody from law school who says nowadays it's only the article level or the institutional repository data that they want to see. They don't want to see the canned analytics data anymore. They want to see this more fine-grained impact data. And of course we can scale up to the institution too, and I won't belabor this. Lorraine talked about how we're very pleased to see how well the downloads grow, but these are some, I think these are the top 10 hits from our institutional repository. You can see that some of these things, Kansas Artists has been downloaded 20,000 times. The fourth one down, Greetings from Teklimakan, a Handbook of Modern Uyghur, has had more than 11,000. You wouldn't believe it, but as it turns out, the study of Uyghur, which is a very large minority in northern China, and has been, it's made the news in recent years because of riots of the Turkic-speaking minorities in China. It's become rather important, and there's really only one good place to get information about this language. That's this online grammar that my colleague in the anthropology department, Arian Dwyer, and some colleagues have put together. So it's, when global issues happen, the path of least resistance is very helpful to get to this, what seems very obscure information, but extremely useful information that's contained in the institutional repository. Another thing that I like to show faculty is that, and this goes again to the universe of one metaphor, faculty can build up their research profile. And I asked my department to do this because I wanted to showcase what they had been doing. So on each of their individual pages, I was also the webmaster too, so I could do all this stuff. But now we're going to go to an automated system called Pro, which Dean Harricum just mentioned, where this will be uploaded automatically now. But the idea is that all of these articles are not just mentioned, giving a kind of 5-year retrospective of what you've been doing lately, but point back to the institutional repository versions of the articles so that you can quickly go to a website and see what faculty are up to in terms of the research. And this is excellent for recruiting. It's excellent for people who are trying to follow the thread of a certain idea as it's developing in a person's career. It also drives traffic to the institutional repository too, so it maximizes the impact that we can show with the statistics that are clicking off with the article level metrics. And another add-on to this, and there are many other tools too, but one of the ones I like is academia.edu, which works like an external homepage, but it has some of the features of social media somewhat akin to Facebook, but not really on the trite and trivial level. But what it does is, because you operate with keywords of your research interests, you automatically get grouped into feeds that interest you based on whatever you declared you're interested in. So if you're interested in South Slavic sound change, you'll get all of the papers that hit on that keyword. If you're interested in open access, you get all those, and so forth. So I link up my articles when they come out to the academia.edu site. They, of course, drive the traffic back to the ScholarWorks site. But as you can see in those little, at least I hope you can see them, there's a little number next to each one of those articles. That's how many times the article has been viewed through this page. So it's attracting some eyeballs that way, which then click over when the viewer clicks into the article and goes through to the KU ScholarWorks database. And there are other tools too, of course, Twitter and things like that could be used in the same way. Another thing that we've done, and this is part of the strategy for getting the campus to come along, is to develop a departmental identity. So with the help of one of the artists in the digital part of the library, we had this beautiful little logo made up of, this is our Russian Jayhawk, which is another story, and then Slavic languages saying, I think it says Slavic library, and we have all of the numbers of our articles in various collections and sub-collections there. And there's a kind of healthy, friendly competition among departments. Who's going to get the most articles into their digital repository? So you can kind of get chair envy going, right? So if your chair is not advocating enough for OA and not getting enough articles in, they say, look at Slavic, that puny little department over there. We're beating out chemistry, and so the chemistry department decides, okay, we've got to catch up. So that's another tool. And then kind of extension of what I showed you before, in addition to having the tip of the iceberg thing on one's individual page, I've encouraged my faculty to link up to their electronic versions of their CVs, so that if somebody clicks on the CV and really wants to dig into their opus as a scholar, they can literally very quickly click through a great deal of their research. Again, all pointing back to the KU ScholarWorks with some minor exceptions. And then something that we've just started to think about, our institution has bought a piece of software called Academic Analytics. And this has created a great deal of anxiety because it's one of the things where, at least implicitly, if not explicitly, the administration is looking at us individually and as departments to see how productive we are, and the implicit threat is, well, if you're not productive enough, then why do we have you? And these, as best as we can tell, are populated by citation data that are sold to the aggregators through things like Thomson Reuters and so forth. And they're basically citation numbers. As has been discussed in other presentations, citation is not necessarily the best indicator of impact. But for humanists in particular, it's problematic because what may be rather systematically and copiously collected in the STEM disciplines is exactly the opposite in humanities. I think what happens in humanities is something like statistical noise, but it gets treated by administrators as meaningful. So you may have just a couple of hits or a couple of citations that get registered, which may be only a small fraction. But with the social pressure to downsize humanities programs and to devalue humanities as part of education, this is a really pernicious tool. And so the article level metrics, the institutional database, the building up of individual faculty and departmental profiles is a way to kind of push back against that and show, look, this is our impact. This is what we're doing, and these analytical tools are not capturing what we're really doing. So these little pieces that I've talked about are, I think, very useful in making the cases for that we are actually doing our jobs and doing it quite well. And another thing is that there are pretty good analytical tools out there that are free, and I don't see that they're any worse than the expensive packages that the universities are buying. And this is also something where we have a little bit of a control as individual researchers over these things, without going into all the mechanics of it. Each researcher can, you've probably all noticed if you've done research that you find your articles captured on Google Scholar, and you see that some citations of them are captured. But what you may not have yet discovered is that you can actually claim your Google Scholar page and customize it, which means you can put your picture there, you can put a link to your home page, and more importantly, going through another step that I learned very recently through the impact story, which I think Heather or somebody mentioned yesterday, you can claim your unique researcher ID and go in and clean up the data. So I happen to have the same exact name as a couple of other people. One's a biologist, another's a pornographer. And so I clean up the references to other Mark L. Greenbergs and take those out. So I just have my own data. And then you get a fairly good representation of your citation indexes with the all-important H index, which is the number of articles that have been cited that number of times. So if you have, it's kind of a mathematician's number where it's a sort of volume rather than a linear representation. So this is an example of a really high-performing STEM discipline person. This is Town Peterson that Lorraine and I have mentioned, one of the trireme of OA advocates at KU. So he's got an H index of 62 for all time. They say that 17 is generally the threshold you need to get into the American Academy of Sciences, so I don't know why he's not in there yet. For humanists, it's a little bit different. Mine is 5. I'm an underperformer. But I think for the small niche that I occupy, this isn't all that bad. And some of my stuff has been cited a lot. In fact, it turns out if you look at, let's see, it's a little bit down there, but one thing that I didn't even publish, I just put up on ScholarWorks as a Word document, has been cited about a dozen times. But some things have been cited a lot, so you can really kind of show in a narrative way, which of your works have been cited, which are starting to become definitive or classic in the field. So that's an example of mine. And then my associate dean, Ann Cudd, is another example of another humanist with a slightly different pattern. She does analytical philosophy and feminist philosophy, and she has a H index of 9, and you can see that the numbers are commensurately higher in her analytics here. I feel it was kind of a victory of mine that I got Ann to claim her page, and she was very pleased with how she's showing up on the Google Analytics. Another thing is with journals, as I mentioned earlier, you can shape your field. We started a partnership, actually, a good colleague and friend of mine in the Republic of Slovenia started talking to me shortly after Yugoslavia broke up, and the idea was we wanted to have a much less, I should say, ideologically burdened journal for publishing about this language, Slovene. It's a language that has 2 million speakers, so it seems like it shouldn't even be on the map, but it's actually one of the most highly variegated languages in the world, so it's a real goldmine for variation, the study of variation in language. So it's intrinsically interesting, but it has a very niche audience traditionally, and in the print version, as I mentioned, you have very, very few readers. So we started with a print version, getting a subvention from the Ministry of Culture and Education in Slovenia in the early 1990s. We had our first issue in 97. And as I said, we had very few readers, but in the mid-2000s, we started retrospectively archiving it in the open access archive at KU. And we started getting a lot of attention. And by the time we reached our 10th anniversary issue in 2007, we showed up in the Cambridge Linguistic series as the definitive journal for Slovene linguistics. And we'd actually been competing with two others that had been around for decades before. And we think a lot of this had to do with the fact that we went open access starting in 2005 and got this global readership. So we really, by far, outpaced our competitors for such a niche area of research. So this is the front page of our the open access version of the journal. Oh, right, it was called the authoritative journal for our field, not the definitive one. So to conclude, and I don't know if I have much time left, but the main points are when you're talking about benefits for faculty, you get wider readership and you're fulfilling the commitment to share knowledge as a public good. You're getting the commitment to an institutional preservation of the EU version, so this is something I didn't really belabor very much, but it was a real selling point too. Is, you know, it's one thing to put your stuff up on your own personal website, but as soon as you move on or you stop caring about keeping up your website, it's, you know, goes stale or links get broken. But the institutional repository, there's a commitment that the institution will keep it up to date, will keep updating PDFs to whatever comes next, and there will always be a permanent link to that work even when you've moved on to your next position or moved on to the next world or whatever. Great impact for tenure and promotion, and a good way for faculty to take control of their data and push back against the aggressive use of institutional data that could be used for deleterious purposes. And you can raise the individual and unit and journal profiles using open access tools. But in general, there was a tipping point at some point talking about all of these issues and many more where people started to worry way less and get much more enthusiastic. So we went from fear and loathing to a great deal of enthusiasm. And a lot of this had to do, as Lorraine said, with Ada and Town and I and many other colleagues who work together as a team, often one-on-one in small sessions, over beer, over coffee, sometimes new faculty coming in, just taking them over to the library and showing them what we're doing at KU, or even prospective faculty taking them to see what they could do if they came to KU. And as you get one by one, you get alpha adopters in various places on campus. Pretty soon it starts spreading through the network. And as I said, we had a tipping point where we now have a great deal of enthusiasm for open access on campus. It's true, as Lorraine said, there are still people who don't know that there's KU Scholar Works, but I'm quite sure that that number is now in the minority and dwindling fast. So that's all I have for you today, but I'd be very happy to follow up with emails or phone calls, and I'm happy to work one-on-one with you later. There's my email address, and I think it's also on the handout. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for having me here today.